Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Open Up to Mail Industry Insights session number 2. For those that don't know me, I am Kelly Northwood, the Chief Executive Officer of the Visual Media Association. This VMA is the association looking after all of the paper, print, mail, packaging, publishing and distribution sectors across Australia and New Zealand across distribution. We employ just under 300,000 people across the country and the region, and letterbox is a very big part of that industry sector. So we're really pleased to be bringing the Open Up to Mail campaign to you, not only as an industry association, but with our key stakeholder partners, Australia Post, IVE Group and Computershare, as well as the Mail Industry Coalition members. They're few too many to announce today, but organisations across the country such as Land Communications, Mailing Solutions, Active Mail, Jeffries Mail, Precision Group, Conversify, Candida Envelopes and a lot more will keep you advised across the mail industry group, as well as key stakeholders such as IVE Group and Computershare, as these organisations will have some of this research and more interpretation and analysis to work with you all across all of your mail campaigns and navigation through the letterbox channel as we go through the release of this information. Bit of housekeeping for you this morning. It's a little bit fresh down here in Melbourne, so you may be pleased to know that the mics and cameras of those not speaking this morning are switched off, which means you don't have to worry about any bed hair and whether you've still got your Uggies on. Keep warm. For those across the country and in New Zealand, welcome. But you can keep all of your feedback coming. There'll be Q&A sessions and pauses after each speaker for you to please feed through your questions, whether it's via the chat or the Q&A button icons at the top of your screen. Please send them through. I'll facilitate that discussion. We can pick into the data a little bit more. The session today has got a bit of a focus on a really important sector of the letterbox across donor acquisition and donor retention, specifically across charity for fundraising. There is a special mail product for this across Australia and indeed New Zealand across the charity mail section product offering. However, it is a unique space and there's some really interesting insights which our speakers, Rebecca and Matt from The Source, will tap into around the community engagement, trust and real retention and understanding of concepts, particularly concepts across charity and fundraising initiatives that I think will be really insightful. I know there's a lot of charities online today, and I want to thank Fundraising Institute for supporting us as well in sharing this content today. So you don't want to hear from me, so I'll now introduce our speakers. A bit of an extra lineup today. We have Rebecca Yock, Director of Head of Qual from The Source, as well as Matthew Swinson, Managing Director from The Source. Our regular attendees, they spoke at our Industry Insights session number 1, and they'll speak last session around metrics and understanding the role of the letterbox and how we can apply metrics, not only to the actual perhaps mailing campaign, but also how that relates a little bit more broadly to the other channels. We know that consumers are more fluid than ever. We're information-rich society, and we move from digital to TVC, radio, letterbox, print without much consideration as consumers. So understanding as marketers and campaign managers how we can actually build really insightful metrics is important, as well as some nice feedback from customers who are using the channel. We have Kevin Perry, who's Head of Customer Experience and Personalisation from the CX and Data Division of IVE Group. He'll talk after we've heard some of the research. So I'm just going to introduce our 2 speakers from The Source initially. Rebecca Yock, Director Head of Qual from The Source, has 23 years experience, a qualitative researcher from across New Zealand, UK and Australia. Rebecca has worked with Sainsbury's, Unilever, Boots in the UK, Victorian Government, CUB, Bunnings, Big W and Woolworths in Australia. So has a really good understanding of not only they're quite big brands and big groups, but most importantly, a really solid understanding of consumer sentiments, consumer research and consumer activities. Rebecca is a really excellent speaker when she talks through the story behind the data. Stats really influence some successful campaign outcomes. Matthew Swinson, Managing Director of The Source, has been working in research and strategy for 18 years in Australia and the UK. He's also worked with some major brands and again has a lot of consumer insights. Brands such as Tesco, Amazon and Google in London, Woolworths, Telstra and the Victorian Department of Health in Australia. He's particularly interested well in the behavioural science, so they'll pivot, and I hand over to them both to share now some insights specifically across the charity sector, but also around the role of letterbox in the community.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kelly. Fantastic. Matt and I will be sharing this presentation. He's a little bit more of the numbers man, and I like those human stories, as Kelly said. So we'll be sort of switching between in case you get sick of any of our voices, our lovely dulcet New Zealand tones. So also, yes, hello to any New Zealanders in the room today. So it was such an exciting brief from the VMA, and we've just been it's been such a fantastic project to work with them on. So the purpose of the research was to understand Australians and New Zealanders' relationship with the letterbox. So who the letterbox consumer is, what does the letterbox mean to them, their family and their home, how do different Australian consumers relate to the letterbox, so by age and life stage specifically, and what are the ground level truths across all consumers. So when you see the quant data, it comes from Australia and New Zealand, and if there's anything specifically different, it tends to get pulled out. Otherwise, it is a consensus. And there was a lot of consensus across the two markets, despite them obviously being quite different. What role does the letterbox play in media and information ecosystems, as Kelly mentioned? So we asked people to kind of really audit their media use. And this is where some really interesting information's come out, just around how the letterbox and printed mail compares to digital and what they're getting in their inboxes in terms of trust and in terms of attention. And what behaviours does print media lead to, and how does it affect the path to purchase? And there's a little bit in here about where things sit in the home when they come in print. And again, it's interesting to look at that in comparison to digital mail. So in terms of how we ran the research, we did an in-depth qual phase, which fed into quantitative validation. And that's a really useful way to run research. I would say that, wouldn't I? But that is a really useful way to run research because it means that we get deep, rich customer insight that we then put the numbers to. So we're not just going blind into a quantitative survey, we're basing it on human truth. So we did ethnographic research with 45 consumers, and we wanted to understand their relationship with the letterbox. We got them to do audits of what they got in the mail. We got them to do some quite fun things like write letters, send them, and go through the process of how that felt for them. We got them to really engage with things in their mailbox. We got them to tell us what they'd really liked seeing in the mailbox that week. And we also did that across digital as well. So that was our ethnographic stage. We then ran focus groups and depth interviews, and often depth interviews with the really heard people. So people lived in quite remote rural areas, or people with disabilities who weren't able to leave their house so much. We then did a usage, took all those findings, created a quant questionnaire, and we took that into a usage and attitude study with 1,500 consumers, 1,000 in Australia and 500 in New Zealand. So that's the kind of methodology side. I'm going to hand over to Matt, who's going to talk through the numbers, and then I'll come back in the end and share some of these custom stories specifically around the charity sector.
Nice one. Thank you for that, Beck. As Beck said, just some context now around, I guess, people's relationship with their letterbox, and then we'll sort of bleed that into some specific charity insights. Now, for any of you who came to our first session, this is a rehash of some data we presented then, but we thought it was useful to contextualize this work today as well. The question here we asked people was, how often do you check your letterbox at home? I think we went into the research wondering whether sort of people were touching their letterbox less often than the data has actually proved they are. So in Australia, it's slightly higher in terms of the frequency. We had almost or over 3/4 of our sample at least touching their letterbox or visiting their letterbox several times a week. In New Zealand, slightly less, mainly because of the shift from daily to several times a week. So Australians have that slightly more frequent relationship with their letterbox. Another kind of contextual sort of point to make when it comes to letterbox is that the letterbox is seen as a trusted channel. Now, again, a question we posited to our respondents was that on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is distrust and 10 is trust, how much do you trust the information you receive through the following media channels? And we've built a bit of a trust index on that. 1 to 4 being distrust, that's the numbers in pink. 5 to 6 sort of being that middle ground of neither nor, which is in the dark blue, and the positive side of things, the 7 to 10, trust in that gold there. Now we've highlighted the letterbox there in particular because I think it actually casts quite a sort of a positive story in comparison to email inboxes, text message, as a channel, and social media. So we had over 2/3 of people saying that they do ascribe trust to it as a channel. And I think one of the reasons is why those trust figures are quite high or relatively high, particularly compared to email inboxes, text messages and social media, is because they're receiving far less spam in it. Again, we put the question to our audience of which of the following have you received spam communications on? As you would expect, as you probably experience yourselves, email inboxes are sort of are rife with spam. Text messages too, that's particularly the case in Australia. New Zealand doesn't seem to be doesn't seem to have the burgeoning text message spam industry we lucky Australians have. And social media, over half of our audience receiving spam in that too. Comparing that to the letterbox, where only a quarter of our audience sort of say that they're receiving spam through that channel. And I think the interesting point to make here is that it doesn't seem to be changing in terms of increase when it comes to the letterbox, where email, text, and social media is bad and getting worse. The letterbox seems to be a little bit more positive and staying stable. To keep tracking along with some context and playing that into what it means for charity, we put a whole lot of attitudinal sort of statements to people to really get their sense of how they feel, how they experience, and how they perceive the letterbox. Just 3 numbers that we thought we'd pick out here, and how that sort of bleeds into people's relationship with their letterbox when it comes to charities or charity mail, are the following. So we asked people the extent to which they agree or disagree with certain statements. A quarter of our sample on the left-hand side saying that getting mail delivered is an essential part of a society. 2/3 saying that a letterbox gives my community a way to keep informed and connected. And over half saying that walking to their letterbox is an important part of their daily routine. And Beck, I think you're going to speak to just what that means and why it matters for charity.
Yes, sorry to take myself off mute. Well, I think it just opens up a context of we're already feeling open and happy at the letterbox in a way that we didn't see people always feeling when they're getting emails through their inbox. It's sort of attached to work, or it's attached to quite a lot of overwhelm and stress, because as we also saw, people like 2,000 on average unread emails in their inbox. So there's a sense that when you're walking outside, you're taking a break from working for home for a lot of people. You're chatting to the neighbours, you're taking the dog for a walk. There's a very open community, human feel when you're at your letterbox, which potentially could lend itself to a more open-minded attitude to receiving charity mail in the letterbox than in an inbox where people are sort of viewing it with a bit of overwhelm, distrust, and a little bit of fear. Is this legitimate? And people are seeing often quite legitimate businesses coming through as scams in their letterbox. So an email, even from the post office, say you've got a post, you've got a delivery to pick up. I didn't order anything, So there's even, or tolls in Australia is a really big one. So even like legitimate businesses with scam fronts. And so I feel like without that baggage, people are much more open and receptive when they get to the letterbox.
Absolutely. Just to sort of to talk to a specific point around surprise and maybe surprise and delight. People are quite open to the idea of getting something unexpected in their letterbox. We asked the question again, to what extent do you agree, disagree with, I like the surprise of seeing what's in my letterbox? And almost 2/3 agreed with that. And I think what's particularly interesting here is that it bends more towards younger people. That sense of sort of surprise or liking the surprise that they might, get something surprising in their letterbox is higher amongst our younger audience than it is amongst our older audience. So almost 2/3 there, sort of almost wanting or liking that sense of surprise. Now, Beck, again, I think you've got a couple of stories here to tell.
Well, I think it's interesting for young people because I think a lot of people can cut you come to this research thinking the younger people are less attuned to printed media or to their mailboxes, and we didn't find that to be true. And I think that's interesting, and it's played out in the statistic around this sense of surprise. If you're going out there and opening it and you're not sure what you're going to get, and I think this is great for unexpected mail, so the things that we didn't know that we wanted, that we didn't know we had, and I think it's that surprise and delight, and again plays well to sort of donor acquisition mail that we may not have been expecting to get.
Absolutely. And just a sort of I guess a sort of an interesting contrast here is when we start making the comparison between mail and online materials, or sort of real tactile physical materials versus online materials. Print absolutely is felt to offer a less overwhelming channel in which to engage consumers. For those of you in our first session, you would have heard us talk at length about this. We see often that people's dwell time with print is just longer than when they're actually engaging with digital materials, which will speak to a story we'll tell about long-form storytelling that charities can lean into a little bit later in this deck. So again, just a sort of a statistic to bring that to life or bring that to the fore. We asked people whether they agree or disagree with the statement that they concentrate more on promotional material when it's printed and in my hand rather than online, and the majority agree with that statement. And I think a couple of the quotes there almost bring that to life a little bit, Beck.
Yeah, I think that there's this. We love this quote at the top, because it's this nice kind of blending of digital language with printed media. If it comes in the mail, at least you get 5 to 10 seconds of FaceTime. And when we learn, as I said, that on average people have over 2,000, I think, can you remember the number specifically, Matt, of unread mails in their inbox, it means they're not even seeing it. And we actually, there's a story later on actually in the charity sector where somebody had received mail from the charity that they subscribed to, and it was interesting because they hadn't seen that in their inbox. And the real fear with inboxes is we're not necessarily even seeing what's coming in them, whereas you can't miss something when you pick it up from your letterbox. So I think there's this, people are missing a lot, and I think this is why the letterbox is a great channel.
Absolutely. All right, a bit of a sort of a state of play on charity in the letterbox. Now, I guess we collected lots of data across lots of different types of media and types of sort of communications that people are getting in their letterbox. One of those was charity. So we've sort of deep dived into that here. Now, I guess just to sort of to put the context of volume or share of letterbox that people are receiving. So we saw that a quarter of Australians, and it was a similar number in New Zealand, have received communications from charities in the past 12 months through their letterbox. So, as you would expect, it's promotional flyers and coupons are, and catalogues are, are filling people's letterboxes more frequently, but charity letters, a quarter of our audience had received them from charities. Now, that was significantly higher amongst 55-year-olds and older, 36%, so over a third of people receiving of that age cohort receiving charity mails, which makes sense given that on average more older people will be sort of engaging with the charitable sector. When we sort of go into a little bit more detail around some of the associations that people have, the sort of the feelings, the vibes that people have with printed communications from charities. Now, they are very positive. We did a bit of a sort of an exercise where we asked people to ascribe certain feelings, certain words to the materials that they're receiving in their letterbox. Now, we've kind of chosen the three here: promotional flyers and charity letters and personal letters, because charity letters almost feels like it sits nicely in the middle of both of those camps. So where the sort of informative and useful and easily accessible associations or values people are getting from promotional flyers and coupons, and the trustworthy, useful and caring feels that people are getting from personal letters are both almost met in a middle sort of ground by charities letters. So they are doing the sort of the rational, they're informative, but they're also delivering something that's a bit more emotional. They are caring. They are felt to be trustworthy. And I think that's quite a positive story, and just in terms of how I guess some of the associations that we would want people to have with materials from their letterbox that are charity related are actually coming to fruition here. And Beck, I'll throw some.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, that relationship that you've got personal letters, caring came up with charity. And I think the most emotional people feel about their letterboxes when they do receive a personal letter. It is the most intimate thing that can happen to them in their letterbox. And we learnt that when we asked people to write letters and to send them to people. And that was an amazing thing that we did in the research, because these beautiful stories came out about people actually putting pen to paper and it being more intimate, the most intimate form of communication, and sometimes even more intimate than a telephone call for some people, because they really had to think, consider their words, and there was a lot of attention given to it. So it's interesting that caring has come up for the charity letters. And there's a quote from somebody who receives mail from the Smith family. Now, obviously, when you support the Smith family as a charity, you sponsor a child, so you do have that relationship. But it's interesting that this person sort of said, it makes me feel good when I read this in the mail, seeing how my donation might be used. And not everybody is necessarily engaging online or necessarily being as close to that. So sometimes still seeing it, the stories from different families and different people, just helps them to understand where their money's going if they're not potentially engaging with that via their email, the email channel or the website. So I think that's, and there's also something around the sitting down, which we'll talk about later, the sitting down and to see the images in the stories. So this person, it feels heartfelt, it makes me feel good. Again, this personal letters, it feels so connected. And obviously promotional flyers and coupons are useful. So we're sitting somewhere, as Matt said, in between there. But I think the caring is really interesting from those numbers.
Sorry, Beck, that wasn't a...
Yeah, that was a hurried along. That's what he does. He just pushes the next slide. He does this all the time. I know.
It was an accidental touch of the mouse. Look, just to sort of, we mentioned dwell time before, which is, evidently a very positive thing, given the sort of the ephemeral nature of so many communications we see from brands and organizations. Now, one thing that we asked people is that when you receive different types of mail, what do you actually do with it? What is your immediate action with it? And I think we've pulled out charity letters here because we think it's quite a positive story, or it tells an interesting story. Sort of a third of our audience hold on to a charity letter for an extended period of time. That's higher than what we saw for promotional flyers, and it's higher than what we saw for coupons and catalogs. No, of course, it doesn't receive the same sort of kind of, almost holding time that a personal letter or a sort of a magazine sort of receives. But those numbers do speak to something that's quite positive, is that there is dwell time being associated with those charity letters.
And again, as we kind of reiterate, and if you would have seen in our last session, is that that's not necessarily, people are flicking through emails. And again, we're not trying to sort of negate the digital channel, every channel, we're omni-channel people, but there's a sense that you're very distracted, you're skipping past it, you might miss it. Worst case scenario, you might think it's a scam. So I think that this is really powerful, because the feeling is that this is sitting in your home. And even if you're throwing away in the recycling bin after reviewing, you have held it in your hands, you have flicked through it. And you can't underestimate that when people aren't even reading a lot of the emails in their inbox.
Absolutely. And just another point to speak to that, sort of a bit of a kind of an exercise or a question we posited to people is, what do you actually do with it? Where do you typically place all these different types of mail that you receive in your letterbox, amongst the people who sort of intend to sort of review it or hold on to these for a slightly longer period of time? And again, we've picked out, for the same reasons I mentioned before, we've picked out promotional flyers and coupons, personal letters and charity letters, because the charity letters shape takes something similar to the personal letters shape in terms of where they keep it in their home. 19% of people who are holding on to their charity letters that they receive are placing it on a desk or a workspace. Again, it's sort of another quite high number here, which I think is quite positive, is that almost 1 in 5 saying they're actually putting it in a to-do or inbox tray. So there's a sort of a kind of a promise there of doing something with it. So it's, they're the numbers, but we think the shape is interesting here, and how closely the shape of where people keep their charity letters is quite similar to where they keep their personal letters. That's a bit of a sort of I guess a sort of a deep dive, or a dive at least, into some charity specific data. I'll hand back over to Beck for a bit of a playbook, we think.
Now, I think this next slide will be of no new news to people who work within the charity sector, but I always love it because I think it's such an important reminder that, psychological studies show that empathy is great when we connect to the story of one human in need. And you probably know those photos from history, those very poignant photos that have evolved often one child or one story, and suddenly everyone is affected by a conflict or an issue or something that's going on in the world that became meaningless when they heard about tens of thousands of people. So there's that strong story that if we hear the story of one person and one person suffering, we responses blow up, or we're suddenly affected. And the reasons why is that, we have a tendency to feel and act less compassionately for multiple suffering and for really big numbers. It's really overwhelming. We can't necessarily visualize it. The problem is too big for us to feel like we can be part of and help with. So there is this amazing ability for stories and human stories to really affect us and to engage us, to want to act and to want to help. And as we said earlier, the letterbox is such an inherently human channel. It's at the end of our homes. It's like a full stop on our homes, or maybe the entry point to our homes. And even if people aren't getting a lot of mail, they're still having a letterbox. You don't see people, when you put to people this idea of not having a letterbox, they can't actually, it's unfathomable to them. It is this very human place at the end of our driveway. It's where we wave to the neighbors. It's where we go when we're bored or we want to get out of the house. It's a very human place. And so human stories delivered in that are so powerful. And this is where print can tell stories so well. And as Matt said, the numbers show it sits around your house in the same way that a magazine would. And I think another really interesting thing about that in the cost of living crisis, I'm digressing here, sorry, apologies, but a really interesting thing about that in the cost of living crisis is that people aren't subscribing to magazines. They're not necessarily getting newspapers. And we know, we talk to people in the study, so I can't afford those sort of things. So getting longer form storytelling mail actually feels like a treat. It feels like you're giving us a moment in time to sit down, have a cup of coffee and read something. And this is positive. I have digressed, haven't I? I've talked. This positive idea of storytelling is really good for the letterbox, because what the research showed us is printed mail has a big capacity for storytelling, and in a way that digital doesn't always. So one is that longer dwell time. It sits around our home. It gets put on the kitchen counter. It gets left around. We look at it, we glance at it. At some point, we review it later. We might have a cup of coffee. You know, here's someone in Queensland. You know, I grab the mail. I always bring it inside. I tend to leave it on the kitchen counter. Anything longer I save to read when I'm having a cup of coffee. And we found this specifically often with the council newsletters. You know, the paper's good quality. They're full of pictures. They're full of it. It's like a free magazine. It's a free story. And people sit down and make time for that. It's an indulging thing to do. And print content also allows for a more sensorial and immersive experience over digital. And I want to talk about added value and quality photography. So this is great. You know, it's this physical aspect of reading print as opposed to online. And because we're dealing with it in a multi-sensorial way, it has a deeper impact on us emotionally because we are touching it with all our senses. And that in a way that we're not doing sometimes when we're looking at digital. So, you know, when looking at the computer or phone, you have to scroll up and down to see the whole page. When you flick through a physical flyer, it's inviting. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it, when people are actually talking about the feeling of turning pages, but your mind and your body are so interrelated. So if you're doing something physical at the same time as mentally, you're feeling it in a lot more powerful and potentially memorable way. We had a few stories here. So here's a story about Jenny. Jenny's a mum of 2 teenagers. She lives in Sydney. Her 12-year-old daughter, Alice, ran a cake stall last year with a friend, and they gave the money raised to the RSPCA. Anyone who's got tweens or kids in their households know that animals are just everything at this age. You know, kids love animals, and so they love to do a cake stall. My neighborhood is surrounded by kids doing cake stalls to give money to the RSPCA. So because she did that one-off donation, she regularly receives mail from the RSPCA, and her daughter enjoys reading those specific stories. And the RSPCA are very good at telling the story of one dog that got rescued. The pictures can often be quite graphic. They end on a really positive note. Everyone's, and it's a real story and journey you're going on with that one particular dog. So Jenny feels more of an affinity, and she's decided to set up a regular donation. It was a one-off donation. The kids wanted to do it, but she's been receiving that mail in the letterbox, and it's really created more of a connection with the charity. And there's a sweet quote from Alice, which is like, they show us all the bad things that's going on and how people have helped. They make me feel that the RSPCA are doing a good thing. I like to read how the animals have changed, and the pictures are sweet. And I like this, you know, I prefer reading it on paper. You can make a collage. You know, you can keep it, you can stick it on your noseboard, you can cut things out, and there's a sense of this sort of tangible reminder that kids are getting from that. And it's something the RSPCA do really well. And it's something that lends itself to a longer form story. Another thing I think is quite powerful, and we have a couple of examples of this, is immersive sensorial, yes, but also added value. And I think there's something around added value that the mail can do that is quite powerful in keeping things in the house for longer. So we had Aisha living with her husband and 2 small children. She's owned a house for a few years. It was a new house. She loves her letterbox. She actually talked about how she just got a sort of temporary one, and she's meaning to go to Bunnings and sort of upgrade or give her letterbox a glow up, I believe is the term now. But she hasn't quite done that yet, but her 3-year-old loves it. It's a nice interactive thing. She got a letter from Human Appeal, and it came with a greeting card. And I thought that was an interesting example where she read the letter, she put that in the recycling bin, but she's kept the card. So the card, getting that card was a sort of way of talking to her community. It was a way of kind of making her feel sort of understood, but also she got to keep it. So it was an actual physical thing that put up on the mantelpiece or wherever, so it stayed around in her home. We talked to another person, Maddie, postgraduate student from Brisbane, living with her partner. She received the free postcard sent by Australia Post in conjunction with Beyond Blue. Now, she decided to send the postcard to a family member battling a serious illness. And it was interesting, and this was part of our letter writing, and it was interesting that she chose that. She had that, she kept that in her house. So it hadn't arrived that week when we did the research. It was sitting, she was saving it at home. So again, that added value of getting that postcard, it was sitting around her house. And, you know, writing the postcard felt deeply intimate. It allowed me to slow down and really consider my words, much more so than a quick email, text, or phone call. So I think these are two really good examples. And I know that obviously other charities do this, you know, send a free postcard or send some other things. So having that added value content is just another way of feeling really great in a time when we have a cost of living crisis. It's nice to get that little win. It's nice to get something in the mailbox that hangs around for longer. And just in summary, the letterbox as a channel for charity mail enables more emotional connection, and it's trusted, and that can't be taken for granted. People are getting a lot of scams in their inboxes. This is a very trusted channel, and it has the ability for more dwell time and to stay in the house for longer. You know, as a reminder of those, 42% check the letterbox at least once a day, 43% trust the information that comes through their letterbox compared to 35% in their email inbox. 54% say they concentrate more on promotional material when it's printed in their hand. They're not distracted. They're not distracted by all the other things happening online or all the things that are popping up, or there's something about that moment when you're actually really immersed in it. And a third of people hold on to charity letters for an extended time, and that was higher than promotional flyers, coupons, and catalogues. And also, furthermore, I think this is an important kind of future goal, I guess, for marketers as well, and a challenge to the print industry, that when we step back and look at attitudes, it does capture people's attention and people are willing to read it. And 62% of the people that we surveyed said they'd be happy to receive promotional material if it's relevant and interesting to me. You know, occasionally in research you get the sort of naysayers who'd be like, oh, well, I'm not interested in that. And then you'd sort of turn and challenge them and go, okay, but if it was something you were interested in, it was a story you wanted to hear, or it was a product that you like, how do you feel about getting mail in the letterbox? Oh, that's a totally different story. So I think people are very open to mail if it's engaging. And I think that's a great challenge to the industry, to create this engaging mail, as we've seen examples of. And just as a reminder, I guess, to everyone in the sector, that memorable charity mail connects and sticks in the reader's minds when it tells stories. And obviously, you know that because there are beautiful stories that come through the mailbox from charities. So that may not be news to you, but it's just worth remembering that memorable mail evokes emotion via that longer form storytelling. The stories about one person, one animal, you know, something people can really connect to, creates connection via that added value content, as we saw with the greeting card, with the postcard that stayed around. There's a great adding more added value to it, so it stays in the house for longer. And quality printing and photos. And we know from the people we talked to that mail that hung around often had photos in it and nice imagery, and it just felt, the paper felt nice. And often that can be very recycled paper. It's not about being glossy. In fact, a lot of people love all the council newsletters and they get, which are on that lovely recycled paper, and it's matte and it feels nice in their hands. So all those things can just give it a much more quality experience as well. So I don't know if we're stuck to time or gone over. That's where we stop. So if anyone has any questions, we'd love to get some questions. You can put them in the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Matt and Rebecca. I have got a couple here, but I've been reminded that we're going to do a group Q&A discussion with Kevin at the end. So as usual, I've gone too fast for myself, but we'll come back. So keep those in mind for your questions. Feed them through on the chat. I've had a few people texting me as well. I also want to clarify, because I've had a couple of text messages, this is black coffee and nothing else. So thank you to the two members that asked me if I was drinking bourbon at 8:30 in the morning. I am not. I'm just into black coffee. So thank you very much. Thanks, Rebecca and Matt. Appreciate that. We will come back to Q&A. So the people who have sent me your text messages. You can also please feel free to jump on the Q&A as we continue through. There's lots of really good insights from that, and I appreciate it. I really like the element that we have spoken about before across this channel around trust and emotional triggers, the linkage to personal letters and where they're placed, and the sort of synergies with charity are really interesting as a brand and marketing sort of with a brand and marketing mindset. Having emotional triggers gives us high brand equity and higher recall. So they're really important things that we can lean into. I'm going to segue that, because there's a person far more educated than I to speak about brand equity, recall, customer needs, and how brands and marketers are approaching this channel. Kevin Perry, Head of Customer Experience and Personalisation, CX and Data at IVE Group. It's one of the longest. It has a very big, it's good they print business cards. It must be very long. It's a very long title. Very long. Well done. Kevin has 20 years experience in analytics and data-driven marketing. He's a customer experience leader who works with Australia's largest enterprise-level clients to assist them with turning their data into insights, then using these insights to craft outstanding customer experiences, leading to sustainable competitive advantage. When I had a chat with Kevin about this, it was actually a segue from our session, our first session, where we did have some questions around metrics and how to understand what other marketers and brands and managers and campaign managers, how they're really managing the measurability and evaluation of these campaigns, and how does that fit with all the other campaigns. I said in my intro, we're very fluid. So we have the brains trust in the room. I really appreciate your giving up your time, Kevin, and sharing with us what you're seeing in the market, and also your experience across this space. I hand over to you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Rebecca and Matt, for taking us through your research. And I've been reading it with keen interest over the last week or two. Kelly, I might just double check with you. Can we just do a time check? How much time would you like me to spend? About 10 minutes is okay, or do I have less than that?
Oh, we're good on time, so we're good on time. So whatever your presentation roll as you can, we're good on time.
No problem. We will get nice and tight here. Okay, so let's make this nice and big for everybody. So appreciate most, and I'll minimize yourself. Can you see my screen A-okay there, Kelly? Lovely, perfect. So without giving too much background on IVE, appreciate several on the call. Most on the call will have heard of us before. As a 100-year-old plus Australian founded company, we're certainly known for our pedigree in print, and that is certainly the case. Over the course of the last 20 plus years or so, as technology has evolved, as we've become a multi-channel world and society, and as consumers, our expectations have changed. There are several parts of our business which have grown significantly, in particular our customer experience and data practices and services. And those certainly work in concert with some of the more traditional parts of our organization. And again, just for context, we work with well over 2,100 organizations across different sectors every year. No two organizations are the same. Each sector is different, and everybody is wrestling with different pressures, be they competitive pressures or regulatory pressures, and certainly within their industries, expectations of their consumers, and always the challenge to grow and to retain existing customers and the like, right? So just in terms of our lens, and particularly how we'll sort of look through some of these key questions that I know several of you have on the phone today. This is our CX and data division. There are three core areas of our organization where we serve our clients to help improve their customer experience offering overall. So the first is channel execution services, particularly as it relates to this morning's call. This is probably the area of print services, which we're certainly well known for within the industry. But obviously,
Kevin,
that is hello.
Might just jump in quickly. If I could get you to hit display settings at the top and just click swap to full presentation.
Hey.
Thank you.
Sorry, do you want to say that again, Langdon? I'm so sorry.
Just at the top, display settings, in the middle, the top left.
Display settings, thank you very much.
Swap presenter view and slideshow.
Hey,
Awesome, thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much. Appreciate you jumping in. So there are lots of other areas that we are supporting these clients as they try and look at multi-channel offerings and communications with their consumers and their prospects and their supporters and the like. To tie it back to the research that the team at The Source have been doing, wanted to draw out these 4 key takeaways from last session around some of those key areas that they have picked up within the research. And I'll really just sort of give our lens from an IVE perspective and some of the organizations that we work with. So firstly, on the far left, with the Cancer Council, we work with them from print perspective on their new donor onboarding journey. Again, to make sure that critical comms are in fact seen. We absolutely see that across our client base. OPSM, another client we work with from an appointment reminder perspective to make sure these key appointments aren't missed. Optus, everybody on this call is certainly, and some has been impacted by some of the cyber challenges that several large organizations have been facing over the last several years. And we have selectively used print as a channel to communicate with consumers, particularly in high pressure times when digital is less of a trusted source. And as a brand, they need to go out to their consumers and provide them with those communications in a high trust environment. And on the far right, Mercer Financial. We've been working with them from a multi-channel communications standpoint for some years. Being in the finance industry, they have lots of regulatory pressures, and they need to make sure that no consumer is missed. So we certainly see across our clients that print absolutely continues to have an importance in terms of communicating with customers and prospects and donors alike. But I guess we wanted to just turn the lens to a data perspective. So not just the qualitative research or anecdotal examples, but what is the data telling us? Is there broad digital fatigue that we're seeing across our client base? And does, in fact, email still engage? And the truth is what we see across our clients is that open rates and click-through rates are, in fact, increasing. So what I've given you here is a snapshot of a select group of clients who we manage their communications. This is about a 2-year snapshot or so and represents about a 12 million a series of touch points from an email perspective. And what we are seeing is over the course of time, these open and click-through rates are continuing to rise. Now, just a few caveats, because we do appreciate this is one set of data. Obviously, first point is we are working with these clients actively to get the right message to the right audience at the right time. Not every brand, not every charity is necessarily working as actively as we are with our clients to refine the content strategy, the targeting strategy, the data strategy behind it. So it is with a caveat. It is a statistically relevant set. That is over 12 million touch points, as I mentioned. Campaign context is always really, really critical. So in DM and some of the research that Rebecca and Matt has touched on, DM is a well-known component of direct mail and the letterbox. And the reality is for most charities, they do struggle to find necessarily same equivalent revenue and donations across other channels, particularly as it relates to some of the longer term or older segments of their database. And obviously, if you were to deep dive into these 12 million touch points, it is a mix of mandatory and marketing messages. There will be micro insights within some of those data sets. So to Kelly's point, wanted to just really touch on from our lens a few key questions, which all of our clients have as well on an ongoing basis. This isn't necessarily unique to this call today. Firstly, how can I work out ROI from investing in the direct mail channel? Secondly, where does print make the most sense, either from a life cycle or a use case standpoint? And how do we get the most out of print, particularly given there are additional efforts, digital tools such as social ads, lookalike audiences, and obviously email marketing, et cetera. They can be a lower barrier to entry from a time to market perspective. So all these considerations are things that certainly our clients feel on a day-to-day basis. Wanted to give some ideas from a not-for-profit perspective as well, appreciating that there are several on the call today. So attributing revenue to print channel is absolutely possible, but you do need to adjust your creative and your call to action approach, because ultimately what you're trying to create is a data point to attribute that donation or that conversion back to the original campaign, and particularly as it relates to this question, back to that channel touch point, right? So just going down the list as examples, so custom QR codes, absolutely things that can find their way into print material, unique donation codes to ultimately, again, give you that data point, personalized URLs to create those traffic and behavioral data points to tie back to the original campaign, print exclusive offers, and call to actions as well, just to ultimately be able to attribute, well, what did we ask our donors in this particular case to do, and how do we tie that back to and attribute that to the initial campaign. Donor surveys, we are starting to see charities ask more necessarily where they are, how they, not only how they found out and what sort of communications they're receiving from the charity, but what necessarily drove them to give a particular points throughout the year. A/B testing with control groups is probably the strategy that we see used most commonly across our charities. It does require additional effort, different time to be able to ultimately provide that detailed analysis. But those are things that simply need to be done if you are trying to attribute revenues back to the original print channel, and phone tracking as well. So if there are call center type activities off the back of the campaign, those can provide additional data points as well. So there are best practices in terms of measuring print channel ROI. Firstly, start campaign and appeal planning with the end in mind. Don't expect to go through the full campaign delivery and in-market process because you won't find yourself having the data points that you need. Robust test and learn plan ultimately is probably the best practice that we see across our clients, and we work with quite a few of them to drive these types of analyses. Be led by data, be very clear on what metrics you're needing to answer, and focus on these key areas as part of your go-to-market strategy. And probably just a couple of points here. No other organization has your supporters, your customers. So while industry benchmark anecdotal examples can certainly guide your strategy, nothing should replace proven or disproven hypotheses in terms of your campaigns. And ultimately, robust analytics practices are needed, which, depending on the level of support and skill sets and platforms you have within your organizations, you may need to find that you go to specialized skill sets or platforms through a partner, such as an IVE or an agency, in order to get the analysis that you required. So just a few comments in terms of where we see print making the most sense, again, particularly back to that not-for-profit focus. There were several comments that both Rebecca and Matt made this morning, and I couldn't agree more. So here are some examples of particular campaigns or appeals or communications, which we see really driving probably that element of human touch and connection that really can help drive those additional conversion rates. So support a welcome and onboarding packs, absolutely renewal or requests for ongoing support. So a lot of these areas are particular areas where dwell time, back to Matt's comment earlier, really helps support maybe a higher consideration of support or higher, or in terms of key times around the year. So Christmas appeals, tax time appeals, so on and so forth. So whether it's a fridge magnet or a mail pack that ultimately lands in a to-do inbox at home, here probably the most important campaigns as we see it that certainly warrant the additional investment into some of these channels. So those are probably the key recommendations and ideas and lenses that IVE has on this. Obviously, we can talk ad nauseum about the details. Probably just as a side comment, outside of just purely a channel decision around going to market in print, email, etc., we probably see, in terms of working with our clients, data and the insights areas as being probably some of the bigger blockers from some of these decisions. Clearly, clean data and consolidated data all in one place makes going to market easier from a print perspective, also from a multi-channel perspective. Insights are really required in order to understand what sort of conversion and behaviors you're getting, both from a pure print versus digital versus multi-channel perspective. And we haven't even touched on AI or propensity modeling in terms of really trying to pluck out of your consumer or your supporter database to understand who are those individuals who are most likely to be able to be relied on for a conversion, which can obviously give you more indication as to who you should be targeting. So those are my insights. I might just pass back to you, Kelly. Obviously happy to take any questions from our listeners today.
Thank you. A few things coming in now, and I've just keep getting these text messages. You're all very terrified to put it in the Q&A. Don't worry. Everyone, I've got everyone here. I'm just going to try and collate this. There's a couple of things. One that has been passed on through a member. Thank you, London, for posting. We talked about this a little bit, Kevin, in regards to there's digital fatigue, which is one thing, but one of the conversations, I'm particularly having this with financial institutions, banks and so forth, around digital saturation. I find this quite a fascinating dialogue, that sort of saying that we've reached, who we wanted to get through a digital comms channel. Then we sort of, like, there was some sort of reference with your Mercer discussion there, but keeping the multi-channel underneath. But this sort of digital saturation of this cohort that really want to stay where they are. And the discussions I'm having is it's not just older people, it's sort of quite a blend.
Yep.
That's really fascinating to me. But then there's also this overall measurability of ROI, and it links into this question that London sent from a member, which is here on the side here. They're keen to understand if research across payment has been made. There was research, I know the research that they're discussing there was in a Scandinavian piece, that they found that people are more likely or more efficient, so quicker payers from the letterbox channel than they are through a bill, which has collection costs to a business. Are you seeing marketers looking at that? Are you seeing them looking at, or is it just purely who's uptake from, if you look at a pure marketing campaign, who's clicked on the QR code, for example? Are businesses actually looking at whole of business operational costs, or is that something that we as industry should be talking a bit more about? What are your thoughts around sort of, I know there's a few different questions in there, but just general thoughts.
Yeah, so just in no particular order. So we do work with probably one of the larger repayments consolidation companies across Australia right now. And without question, they use print. Now, they have a heavy lean in and investment in the analytics side because even they recognize that blanketing everyone with a print follow-up and follow-ups doesn't always particularly make sense. But I guess the question just comes back to, does print still make sense in the mix? And it absolutely does. The follow-up question becomes, well, where does it necessarily make sense? And you have to be led by data. So you have to understand and have as many data points as you can to understand, okay, at an individual one-to-one level, who can we associate them with? What sort of segmentation modeling, propensity modeling can we put over top of that? Indicatively, what does that tell us in terms of the follow-up strategies? And let's do some testing and learning. These are all hypotheses that ultimately need to be constantly revisited over the course of time. There's no silver bullet answer because ultimately, again, from a brand consumer perspective, every organization is different. Every set of consumers is different as well. So ultimately, it boils down to a robust test and learn process to ultimately understand for your organization what makes the most sense.
Thank you. One of the other things I think Rebecca may have talked to about age breakdowns, and I love that. I love how we can kind of drill in, as Kevin's saying, drilling into that data and understanding. 55-year and older, this is a higher disposable income. Females in this category of one of the highest social conscious behaviours. This is the category that's most likely to donate money, as opposed to the 25, 34-year-old category, which are most likely to donate volunteer time. So obviously different people in different parts of their financial journeys. Should with that kind of summary and what you found in some of the research and how people are connecting with the content, when charities, donor acquisition through the charity mail section, it's really, really fundamental to keeping some funds coming in to charities. Did you sort of see that, is there potentially, if you think about the data you've looked at, that we actually can do two-tier campaigning to, 25 to 34, it's more volunteer, and then the older cohort that possibly don't have as much time or, physical ability, whatever we want to say, I don't know. I'm making some stereotypes, which is not great in a research discussion, but should we be splitting our campaigns? Is there validity in charities really thinking about sort of streaming campaign offering or comms?
Was that a question for me?
You, Rebecca, Matt, you're all nodding.
Rebecca, I might just jump in here, and certainly you can sort of add your 2 cents on there. So we are certainly, as CX-driven, data-driven organization, we are proponents of personalized communications, right? So there's nothing wrong with you having an entirely separate mail piece to myself, which looks entirely different to Rebecca's, to Matt's, to yourselves, Kelly. So as long as you're working with your print service provider, your direct marketing team to rely on those data points and have that drive your creative, every communication that every consumer receives should be personalized. And certainly the technology and the data sets are out there today to enable all that. Where a lot of organizations, particularly in the charity sector, do struggle is resources internally. There are instances of rinse and repeat thinking in terms of, well, this is the campaign that we've always done, so let's just keep going with the type thing. But the reality is we all live in a data-driven world. We know what data organizations have on us, and we expect them to use it. So those expectations were entirely different 10 or 15 years ago to today. So I would say to those brands who are on the call today, who maybe haven't necessarily made that leap, this is what your supporters and your consumers are expecting of you. Make the leap.
I think it's the great thing about QR codes, as you say, you just want to limit the steps that people have to take to do something. And I think having a QR code is a great way of then you can go and see where you can help, without having that all to be on the printed mail. But that's such a great way to do that and to send people to different avenues.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously with COVID, the QR codes, I mean, they're back and we're all fairly comfortable with them right now. So particularly from a print perspective, which is a trusted channel to scan in a QR code and have that take you to a personalized URL, that is an entirely trusted call to action, which would have been entirely different, 5-10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I did a presentation once about QR codes post-COVID. Pre-COVID, less than 20% of Australians knew what to do with a QR code. Post-COVID, over 80%. So it was something really extreme. So, silver lining in a challenging period, but certainly QR codes is a wonderful connectivity between two channels. And I often talk about that print and digital are actually a really beautiful marriage because their strengths complement each other and their weaknesses complement each other in, whether it's convenience or dwell time and print, you have a much longer, more potentially meaningful, higher recall brand equity conversation. Digital, you can get them straight into the shopping cart. So there's really nice fluidity, it's just a nice marriage there. The relevance to me, the stat that I think I'm not sure if it was Rebecca or Matt actually, the 62% would like to see more if it was relevant to me, taps into this data. I didn't actually want to go into a whole data thing, but it really is all the linkages. Kevin's point's very accurate. And then that sitting on the kitchen counter, whether it's charity mail, personal letter, I love that they're sort of held together. That brand equity, high recall across trust and emotionality. You've talked a little bit, Rebecca, about, let's really get these pieces, these campaign pieces, these letterbox pieces to be something that stands out from a creative design perspective. A major retailer added pink to their catalogue and those items that were highlighted with this little pink tag had a real boost in sales. Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, you were in all the focus groups, Rebecca, about that design because it's data, but it's also designing these sort of nice pieces that have that, real return on it and response rate increase and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit about creativity and interaction. I think there's something about, there was a great quote we had from the researcher did. Someone was talking about IKEA, something they got from IKEA. Unfortunately, they didn't include a photo, but there was a sense that you had to do something else to open it, or it had different, I think it was a pamphlet with panels. So there was just something about the act of opening it up that just felt like it was just connecting more, or they had to do something. And I think people talked also in the research about, could you tear something off? We know print is really great as a visual reminder. So things that you can tear off and stick on the fridge, things that just involve a little bit more interaction. And people talked about often what they're getting in their letterbox is very one-dimensional. It's a single sort of, flyer, there's nothing that can be opened. And I think that's where charity mail is so great because you do get those almost a booklet, with nice photos in it, or the fact that the Beyond Blue had a tear off postcard they could keep, or I think I got something from the RSPCA where they gave me a Christmas card, like a blank one that I could then use, So there was something about that kind of added value and things that just feel a little bit different. You can be quite creative. And I think especially the younger cohort want to see that in their letterbox. So I think they do. I think they like a sense of some novelty or creativity, because that's what they're used to seeing out in their world anyway. So I think you've got a lot of permission there, especially with younger.
And I think you can do it really cost effectively. We had an award winner in New Zealand who was selling a new range of flat screen televisions, and they sort of had it was a DM piece, and they sort of opened up, but it opened up flat to be the size of a 75-inch or something like that you could actually put on your wall to see how it fitted. And that's kind of clever. That wasn't an overly expensive piece to produce or, design. It was just clever. And I think charities have often got, tight marketing budgets, but outside of that, all brands have got tight marketing budgets when you're doing mass communication. And sometimes you can be really clever and work with your mail house and your printer and designers to really push that, because that's just as engaging and kind of a clever, oh yeah, wow, that does work. You've engaged with something.
Absolutely. And we do a lot of research with kids at the source. And I think what's really interesting is children around that age, sort of 9 to and I've done work for World Vision looking at kids as well, and children from that age of, sort of 8, 9 through to sort of when they get a bit too teenage, like 16. But they love giving and supporting, and they're the highest number who sign up for charities, who do the cake stalls, who do all that. Primary school is huge for that. And I feel like, there's that quote from Alice, you sort of think, a fold out, I'm getting overexcited here, but, a fold out that has a map of the part of the world where these children live, or some other interesting facts. Kids love facts, it folds out to a poster of the dog, like there's something about that. I think engaging children in charities is huge. And we know from the research we do that children hassle their parents about all sorts of things, and they want to be part of it. So I feel like there's so much added value for kids you could do. And I thought that quote from Alice was great. She's cutting out the pictures of the dogs. But again, your fold out idea just opens up this world of ideas for things that could stick around the house for longer, especially for kids.
Yeah, I think I've got 2 nephews who get their toy catalogue and talk to me about their toy magazine. So there's different language and dialogue, and I also caution every marketer and brand owner who's listening to this that we get very strung up on what we call the channels, but consumers are far more fluid in their dialogue. One last question that I'm going to feed into the one that Phil has fed through. I think I know exactly who this comes from because I've got it 3 times, so we better ask the question. Any thoughts about the data security principles of mail versus email? The ACNC, the Australian Charities Not-for-Profit Commission, has issued some warnings around, probably more digital channels with scams, but not just as people scamming, fake charities scamming consumers for donations, but also warning charities to be careful of when they're being approached on the other side, which is quite an interesting warning. The Australian Red Cross released a warning similarly, I read, about bushfire donations and just general advice around general donation security advice. I don't know who this goes to best, but, we do have obviously a higher propensity where sort of letterbox is 0.063% compared to 60% are coming through digital or mobile SMS channels. Should marketers use the trust triggers of letterbox to start the dialogue and then have close? So is that a real option to start the funnel and use the trust triggers of letterbox, particularly if a charity gets scammed? We've seen some major brands, Optus, Medibank, some really sort of scary ones that have happened over the past 12 months. Everyone is getting a little bit better on that, but there is a real trust trigger. Facebook, after the Cambridge Analytica, went out and did a newspaper and started their own magazine, Grow, and they really went into the print. Optus is one that wrote to all their clients via mailer following some data breaches and so on. With those trust triggers, would it be recommended to start the campaign there and then, use digital in different ways once you sort of qualified your contact points? Or what are brands thinking about that and how are they sort of approaching it? Any ideas for how charities can tap into that also, possibly, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the Optus example, that's precisely what they did in their case. They reset and started the dialogue using a very trusted channel. Now, that's not to say there weren't digital communications, clearly, not just in the media, but also from a direct sense through email, etc. So it is an option to reset the trust communications and whatnot. So it's something that we talk to our clients about as part of the mix, as part of the ongoing strategy. So absolutely, that can be where print plays a part.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I've got to wrap up because I'm seeing my little thing flash down the bottom there. Don't you love these timers? I just want to be really clear with all, and we're going to have a cybersecurity data management panel discussion coming up soon. So I'll share that with everyone who's in attendance today. There are obligations around data security, particularly around personal content of our customers, donors, and all of the rest of our community we collect data from, in both print and digital. And I think there's reporting obligations as well if there is a breach. So we are going to pull together a bit of a summary for everyone, a fact sheet, because sometimes it's just a good reminder, particularly if you've got new people coming into business, to get that right. It's critically important and can damage your brand for many, many years if we don't get it right and put in those great protections at the beginning. So thank you, everybody. It's a good effort for you to turn up in Melbourne. It's the Thursday before a long weekend. Go Swannies. I was born in Sydney, so we'll go for the Swans for this round. I do want to again thank our speakers. I'll go down Kevin, Rebecca and Matt for today. Your sharing of knowledge, ideas and brain trust. They're all things that I hope everyone in attendance can take some notes of, get some ideas and start brainstorming. I often encourage attendees to sort of watch this with their teams or watch these sort of sessions with their teams and then do a half an hour just little brain dump afterwards with all the ideas and how you can apply them to your campaigns and initiatives. Thank you to the supporters, Australia Post, IVE Group, Computershare and Mail Industry Coalition. Rattled off a few at the beginning, I'll rattle off a few now. Cameron's Tonic Group, Southern Impact, D&D Mail, Precision Group, I think I mentioned earlier, Slip Form, AdPost, Bright Group. There's a whole heap more. I'm going to get in trouble because I'm sure I've missed a couple. We'll put them all on our website. Those organisations under the Mail Industry Coalition are those who have been briefed with all the data and their teams are being trained in how to use this data. So they're the endorsed suppliers across the country and region. The next one is going to be a physical event. We're back to having lattes together at the Melbourne Museum on the 18th of October at 10 o'clock. It'll run for an hour and a half. Melbourne Museum has car parking underneath and obviously the Nicholson Street tram line. This will align for those attending the inaugural gala event of the year, the Real Media Awards. It's a 70s theme. I want flares and platforms. The focus of the next session will be around retail marketing space, unaddressed and addressed, DM loyalty programs, etc. And we're also going to have a lineup of retailers and brands who are doing loyalty programs and using the channel. I've got a couple of people we're talking to, but if anyone's interested in participating in that panel, please contact the team, hello@visualmediaassociation.org.au. I want to thank, at one point we had the lovely dulcet tones of London, who is behind the scenes, London Mills running all of this in the background. And I want to thank London and Phil Marriott who run around and make all this happen. And sometimes it's no easy feat. It's all right for us to just turn up and settle in. So thank you to the team. Have a great rest of day and long weekend for those who are enjoying the long weekend. And I look forward to seeing you all on the 18th of October at our next session. Take care.